The dust devil spiraled across the barren stretch of Arizona desert, and Tabitha Crawford watched it dance in the distance while her mare's labored breathing grew weaker beneath her. Each rattling gasp a countdown to a nightmare she had prayed would never come. The sun hung merciless overhead, baking the cracked earth and turning the air into something that hurt to breathe. She had been riding hard since dawn, trying to reach Agua Caliente before the worst heat of the day, but fate had other plans. Her mare, a gentle chestnut named Rosie who had carried her faithfully for 3 years, had stepped wrong in a prairie dog hole an hour back. Tabitha had felt the animal's leg give, heard the sickening crack that made her stomach turn, and knew immediately what it meant even before she dismounted. Now Rosie lay on her side in the sparse shade of a cluster of rocks, her dark eyes glassy with pain and confusion. Tabitha knelt beside her, stroking the horse's neck with trembling fingers, her own tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She was 22 years old, a schoolteacher heading to her new post in Agua Caliente, and she had never felt more alone or helpless in her entire life. The landscape stretched empty in every direction, nothing but sage and sand, and the distant purple smudge of mountains that seemed impossibly far away. She had maybe 2 canteens of water, some jerky and hardtack in her saddlebags, and no real idea how many miles still separated her from civilization. "I am so sorry, girl," Tabitha whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry." She knew what had to be done. Knew it with a certainty that made her want to vomit. But she could not leave the animal to suffer, could not walk away and let the desert take her slowly. Tabitha had never shot anything larger than a rattlesnake before, had never taken a life, but she reached for the revolver her father had insisted she carry. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip it. She cocked the hammer, pressed the barrel to Rosie's temple, and squeezed her eyes shut. The gunshot cracked across the desert like thunder, sending up a flock of crows from somewhere unseen. The echo rolled away into silence. Tabitha dropped the gun and bent double, retching into the sand even though her stomach was empty. She stayed that way for a long time, gasping and crying, until the sun's position reminded her that grief was a luxury she could not afford. She had to move. Had to try to reach town before nightfall, or before her water ran out, or before any number of terrible things could happen to a woman alone in the wilderness. Tabitha forced herself to stand, forced herself to gather her saddlebags and canteens and bedroll. She took one last look at Rosie, whispered another apology, and started walking north. She left her trunk behind, the one with most of her possessions, because she simply could not carry it. The sun beat down without mercy. Within half an hour, her shoulders ached from the weight of her burdens. Within an hour, her throat felt like sandpaper. She rationed her water carefully, allowing herself only small sips, but she knew it would not be enough. Not if Agua Caliente was still a full day's ride away. On foot, it might as well have been on the moon. The landscape wavered and shimmered with heat. Tabitha focused on putting one foot in front of the other, her button-up boots that had seemed so practical in Tucson now feeling like instruments of torture. Blisters were already forming. Her dress, a sensible gray traveling outfit, soaked through with sweat. She pulled her bonnet lower to shield her face, but it did little good. The sun here was a living thing, a predator that stalked and devoured. She had been walking for perhaps 3 hours when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought it was a trick of the heat, a hallucination born of desperation. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, and when she turned she saw a rider approaching from the east. A single man on a tall bay horse, moving at an easy lope. Tabitha's heart hammered in her chest. In this empty place, a stranger could mean salvation or disaster. She had no way of knowing which. She stopped walking and waited, trying to calm her breathing, trying to appear less frightened than she felt. The rider drew closer, and she could make out more details. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a faded blue shirt, leather chaps over worn denim. A working cowboy by the look of him. He had a rifle in a saddle scabbard and a gun belt at his hip, but so did most men out here. When he was close enough that she could see his face, he slowed his horse to a walk and then stopped a respectful distance away. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough-edged, but not unkind. "You look like you could use some help." Tabitha tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She nodded instead, and the cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, she noticed, with broad shoulders and a lean, rangy build. His face was sun-weathered and dusty, with a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. "My name is Owen Ashford," he said, pulling a canteen from his saddle and offering it to her. "Drink slow now, not too much at once." She took the canteen with shaking hands and sipped carefully, even though she wanted to gulp it down. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. Owen waited patiently, not crowding her, his expression neutral but watchful. "Thank you," Tabitha managed after a moment. "My horse, she broke her leg, I had to." She could not finish the sentence. "I heard the shot about an hour back," Owen said quietly. "Figured someone might be in trouble. How far back? 3 hours walk maybe, I do not know for certain." He nodded slowly, his gaze taking in her saddlebags, her obvious exhaustion, the desperate situation she was in. "Where were you headed?" Agua Caliente. "I am supposed to start teaching at the school there." "My name is Tabitha Crawford." "Miss Crawford," he acknowledged. "Agua Caliente is still a good 20 miles from here. Maybe more. You would not make it on foot, not in this heat, not without more water than you are carrying." The blunt truth of his words settled over her like a weight. She had known it already, of course, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She felt tears prickling at her eyes again and blinked them back furiously. She would not fall apart in front of this stranger. Owen studied her for a long moment, then came to some decision. He reached for his horse's reins and began checking the saddle. "You will take my horse," he said. "I will walk alongside and lead him. It is the only way you will make it before dark." Tabitha stared at him. "I cannot ask you to do that. You do not know me. I am a complete stranger." "That is exactly why I am offering," Owen said, and there was something in his tone that suggested this was not up for debate. "A woman alone out here, on foot, with night coming on, that is not something I can ride away from. My conscience would not let me sleep another night as long as I lived." "But you'll be walking, in this heat. That is hardly fair." He gave her a look that might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell with the dust and the shadows from his hat. "Madam, I have been walking through desert heat since before I could read. I will be fine. You, on the other hand, are about 10 minutes from heatstroke, so let us not waste any more time arguing about it." He was right, and Tabitha knew it. Her pride wanted to protest further, wanted to refuse charity from a stranger, but her survival instinct was stronger. She nodded, and Owen helped her secure her bags to his saddle, then offered his linked hands as a step. She put her boot in his palms and he lifted her easily into the saddle. The bay horse, a gelding with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, stood rock-steady beneath her. "His name is Red," Owen said, patting the horse's neck. "He is good-tempered. Just keep him at a walk and he will do fine. You can drink from my canteen whenever you need to. I have got 2 more in my saddlebags. What about you?" Tabitha asked, suddenly worried about this strange, generous man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. "I will drink when I need to," Owen said. He checked that everything was secure, then took Red's reins and started walking north. "Let us move. We have got ground to cover." They moved in silence for a while, Owen walking with long, steady strides that covered ground faster than Tabitha would have thought possible. He did not seem to struggle with the heat or the distance, just kept his head down and his pace even. Red followed obediently, his gait smooth and comfortable. From her vantage point in the saddle, Tabitha could study her rescuer without being too obvious about it. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape, someone who had spent his whole life in the saddle or on his feet under the desert sun. His shoulders were broad, his back straight despite the heat and the walking. There was something solid about him, something dependable. "Where were you headed?" Tabitha asked after they had been walking for perhaps half an hour. "Before you found me, I mean." "Nowhere in particular," Owen said without looking back. "I work for a ranch about 40 miles east of here. Finished a cattle drive a few days ago and I am making my way back. Taking my time, seeing the country. You ride alone. Usually. I prefer it that way." There was something in his tone that suggested this was not a topic he wanted to pursue, so Tabitha let it drop. They walked on, the sun sliding slowly toward the western horizon. The landscape changed gradually, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with more vegetation. They passed a dry creek bed, then another. Owen seemed to know exactly where he was going, never hesitating, never checking a map or compass. He just walked. "How do you know the way?" Tabitha asked. "It all looks the same to me." "You learn to read the land," Owen said. "See that ridge line over there? That runs north-south for about 50 miles. As long as we keep it on our left, we are heading the right direction. And those mountains ahead, the Kairakahuas, they are a good landmark. Agua Caliente sits at their base, more or less. Have you been there before, once or twice?" "It is a small place, growing though, more folks moving in all the time." "That is what they told me when they hired me. They said they needed a school teacher because there are so many children now. You came all the way from Tucson by yourself?" "Yes." "My father wanted to hire an escort, but I told him I could manage. I have been riding since I was a girl." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose I proved him right and myself wrong." "These things happen," Owen said. "Horses break legs, it is not your fault." His matter-of-fact tone was oddly comforting. Tabitha felt some of the guilt that had been crushing her chest ease slightly. They walked on, and gradually she found herself talking more, filling the silence with stories about her family in Tucson, about her decision to become a teacher, about her nervousness at starting a new life in a strange town. Owen listened without interrupting, occasionally making a sound to show he was paying attention, but mostly just walking. There was something peaceful about his presence, something that made her feel safe despite the fact that they were strangers alone in the wilderness. The sun was lower now, the heat beginning to ease into something more tolerable. Owen showed no signs of tiring. His pace never slowed, never faltered. Tabitha could not imagine walking for hours in this heat without complaining, but he seemed to accept it as simply what needed to be done. She found herself developing a growing respect for this quiet, stoic man who had given up his horse for her without a second thought. "Can I ask you something?" Tabitha said after a long stretch of silence. "You can ask. Why did you do this? Give me your horse, I mean." "You could have just given me some water and directions and ridden on. Most men would have." Owen was quiet for a moment and Tabitha thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My sister died out in the desert, 5 years ago. She and her husband were traveling to California and their wagon broke down. By the time someone found them, it was too late. She was only 23. He paused and Tabitha saw his shoulders tighten. I was not there, could not help her, but I can help you." The raw honesty of his words hit Tabitha like a physical blow. She felt tears burning in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear or exhaustion. They were tears of gratitude, of understanding. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry about your sister." "It was a long time ago," Owen said, but his voice suggested the wound was still fresh. They did not talk much after that. The silence between them had changed, though, become something deeper and more comfortable. Tabitha found herself watching Owen with new eyes, seeing past the rough exterior to the grief and decency beneath. He was a good man, she thought. A truly good man, the kind that was rare in any time or place. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, Owen finally slowed. "We will stop here for a bit," he said. "Let Red rest and we can eat something. We should reach Agua Caliente in another 2 hours or so once it cools down." He helped Tabitha down from the saddle and she nearly collapsed when her feet hit the ground. Her legs had stiffened during the ride and pain shot through her blistered feet. Owen caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy now," he said. "Sit down. Let me take a look at those boots." "I am fine," Tabitha protested, but Owen was already guiding her to a flat rock. "You are not fine. You have been walking in those things before you ever got on Red, and I would bet money you have got blisters the size of silver dollars." He knelt in front of her and waited. "May I?" The request was so polite, so respectful, that Tabitha found herself nodding. Owen unlaced her boots carefully and eased them off. Even through her stockings, she could see the dark spots of blood where blisters had formed and burst. Owen made a sound of disapproval. "We need to clean these," he said. "Do you have any spare stockings in your bags?" "Yes, but get them. And if you have got any kind of salve or ointment, that too." Tabitha dug through her saddlebags and found a pair of clean stockings and a small tin of salve her mother had packed. Owen took them, then pulled a reasonably clean bandana from his pocket and wet it with water from his canteen. He cleaned her feet with surprising gentleness, his calloused hands steady and sure. He applied the salve, then helped her put on the clean stockings. The whole process was incredibly intimate, but there was nothing improper about it. He was simply taking care of her, the way one human being should take care of another. "Thank you," Tabitha said softly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Owen said. He sat back and pulled some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering her half. "Eat. You need to keep your strength up." They ate in companionable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. The desert at night was a different world, cooler and more forgiving. A coyote howled in the distance, and Red's ears pricked forward, but the horse remained calm. Owen checked the animal's hooves and legs, running his hands over him with the expertise of someone who knew horses inside and out. "He is a good horse," Tabitha observed. "You must have had him a long time." "About 8 years," Owen said. "Got him as a 3-year-old, barely broke. He was wild as a March hare, but we figured each other out." There was genuine affection in his voice. "He has carried me through sandstorms and snowstorms and just about everything in between, never once let me down. And now he is carrying me instead of you. He does not mind. He is probably enjoying the lighter load. I am not exactly small." Tabitha smiled despite herself. It was true. Owen was a big man, easily over 6 feet and broad through the chest and shoulders. Next to him, she felt small and delicate, though she had never thought of herself that way before. They rested for about 20 minutes, then Owen helped her back into the saddle and they resumed their journey. The night air was blessedly cool, and with the stars to light their way, the landscape took on an almost magical quality. Owen walked on, tireless, his boots crunching on the sandy soil. Tabitha found herself growing drowsy, lulled by Red's steady gait and the rhythmic sound of Owen's footsteps. She jerked awake several times, afraid of falling from the saddle, but each time Owen's voice came out of the darkness, calm and reassuring. "I have got you. You are safe." She believed him. This man she had known for less than a day, this stranger who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return, she trusted him completely. It was a strange feeling, both frightening and comforting. They reached Agua Caliente just before midnight. It was a small town, as Owen had said, really just a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures clustered around a central square. A few lights still burned in windows, and Tabitha could hear piano music drifting from what was probably a saloon. Owen led them straight to a building with a sign that read Dr. Samuel Morris and knocked firmly on the door. A sleepy-looking man in his 50s answered, holding a lamp. "Yes. What is it?" "This lady needs medical attention," Owen said. "She has been through a rough time. Can you see to her?" The doctor took one look at Tabitha, still sitting on Red, and ushered them inside immediately. "Bring her in, bring her in. My wife will help." Owen helped Tabitha down and she practically fell into his arms, her legs refusing to hold her. He carried her inside effortlessly and set her on an examination table. The doctor's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, appeared in a dressing gown and began fussing over Tabitha immediately. "When did you last eat? Drink? Good heavens, you are burning up with fever. Samuel, get me cool water and cloths." Everything became a blur after that. Tabitha was aware of being undressed down to her chemise and drawers, of cool water being sponged over her burning skin, of someone cleaning her feet properly and bandaging them. She heard Owen's voice, low and steady, explaining what had happened. Heard the doctor's concerned murmurs. Then she was being helped into a bed in a small room, clean sheets pulled up to her chin, and the world went blessedly dark. When Tabitha woke, sunlight was streaming through lace curtains and she had no idea where she was. She sat up quickly, panic flaring, and immediately regretted it as her head spun and her feet throbbed. The events of the previous day came rushing back. Rosie, Owen, the long walk through the desert. The door opened and the doctor's wife came in carrying a tray. "Oh good, you are awake. How are you feeling?" "Confused," Tabitha admitted, "and sore, very sore." "That is to be expected. You were quite dehydrated and exhausted when you arrived. You have been sleeping for almost 14 hours. 14 hours. Tabitha looked around wildly. "Where is Owen? Is he all right? The cowboy who brought you in?" "He is fine. He slept in our barn and has been checking on you every few hours. Very concerned about you, that one. Would not leave until we assured him you would recover." Relief flooded through Tabitha. "I need to thank him. I need to see him." "You need to eat first," the woman said firmly, setting the tray on Tabitha's lap. "Doctor's orders. Then we will see about getting you up and around." Tabitha ate obediently, discovering she was ravenous. The food was simple but delicious. Eggs, toast, bacon, and coffee. She had never tasted anything so good. When she was finished, the doctor's wife helped her dress in a clean dress from Tabitha's saddlebags, which someone had thoughtfully brought in. Her feet were still tender, but the bandages helped, and the woman gave her a pair of soft slippers to wear instead of her boots. "The schoolhouse is just down the street," the woman said. "Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, has been expecting you. She stopped by this morning when she heard you had arrived. I told her you needed rest, but she said to send you over whenever you were ready." "What about Owen?" Tabitha asked. "He is probably still in the barn, or he might have gone to the livery to check on his horse." "That man loves that horse like a brother." Tabitha made her way carefully out of the doctor's house, wincing with each step, but determined. She found Owen exactly where the doctor's wife had predicted, in the barn behind the house, brushing down Red with long, rhythmic strokes. He looked up when she entered and something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or gladness. "Miss Crawford," he said, "you look better." "Thanks to you," Tabitha said. She moved closer, and the words that had been building in her chest all night came tumbling out. "I do not know how to thank you. You saved my life. You gave up your horse, walked for hours in the heat, took care of my feet, brought me safely here. You did not have to do any of that, but you did, and I will never forget it." Owen looked uncomfortable with the praise. He ducked his head, focusing on Red's coat. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Tabitha said firmly. "They would not have. Most people would have given me some water and ridden on, or worse. You are a good man, Owen Ashford, and I am grateful beyond words." He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and Tabitha felt something shift in the air between them. His gray-green eyes held hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Owen cleared his throat and went back to brushing Red. "Where will you go now?" Tabitha asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Back to the ranch, I suppose. They will be expecting me in a few days." 40 miles east, you said, give or take. When will you leave?" "Soon. Maybe this afternoon. Red is rested and I should get back." The thought of him leaving filled Tabitha with an unexpected sadness. She had known this man for less than a day, but he had shown her more kindness and decency than most people she had known her whole life. She did not want him to just disappear from her life like he had never existed. "Will you stay for dinner at least?" she asked. "The doctor's wife mentioned that Mrs. Henderson, the woman who runs the school, would like to meet me. Perhaps you could join us. It is the least I can do." Owen hesitated, and Tabitha could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he nodded. "All right. One meal. Then I really do need to get going." That one meal turned into 3 days. Tabitha insisted that Owen rest properly before making the long ride back to his ranch, and the doctor agreed, saying that pushing too hard after walking all day in the desert heat was a good way to end up sick. Owen protested, but not too hard, and Tabitha suspected that some part of him wanted to stay. He took a room at the town's small boarding house and spent his days helping around town, mending fences and fixing a leaky roof for an elderly widow, refusing payment but accepting meals. Tabitha saw him every day, at breakfast and dinner, and sometimes in between when she was not busy settling into her new teaching position. Mrs. Henderson, a stern but fair woman in her 60s, had welcomed Tabitha warmly and shown her the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building that smelled of chalk and wood polish. She would have 15 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and classes would start the following Monday. Tabitha was nervous but excited, and she found herself wanting to tell Owen about every detail. He listened patiently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, and offered encouragement that she found she needed. On the second evening, they took a walk together through the town and out into the desert scrubland beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the air was finally cool. They walked slowly, mindful of Tabitha's still healing feet, and talked about everything and nothing. Owen told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the hard years after his father died, and his mother struggled to keep the place going. Tabitha told him about her childhood in Tucson, about her mother's insistence on education, about her dreams of making a difference in the world one classroom at a time. "You will be a good teacher," Owen said. "You have got patience and kindness. That is what matters most." "I hope so." "I am terrified I will fail them somehow." "You will not." He said it with such certainty that Tabitha almost believed him. They stopped at the top of a small rise, looking back at the town with its scattered lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Owen stood with his hands in his pockets, his profile sharp against the sky. Tabitha studied him, this quiet, strong man who had walked into her life at the worst possible moment and changed everything. "I wish you did not have to go," she said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Owen turned to look at her, and she saw surprise in his eyes, followed by something else, something warm and uncertain. "Miss Crawford, Tabitha," she interrupted, "please. After everything, I think you can call me Tabitha." "Tabitha," he said, and the way he said her name made her heart skip. "I've got obligations, a job. The foreman is counting on me to be back. I know, I do, I just—" She trailed off, not sure how to put her feelings into words. She had known him for such a short time, but it felt like longer. Felt like she had known him forever, or had been waiting her whole life to meet him. "I feel like I am saying goodbye to someone important, and I do not know when or if I will ever see you again." Owen was quiet for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage. Finally, he said, "Would you want to see me again, I mean?" Tabitha's breath caught. "Yes, very much yes. The ranch is not so far. I get time off every few weeks. I could ride over if you wanted, see how you are settling in." "I would like that." Tabitha felt a smile spreading across her face, wide and bright and impossible to contain. "I would like that very much." Owen smiled back, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and lighter. "Then I will come back, soon as I can." He left the next morning at first light, riding red out of town with a wave back at Tabitha, who stood on the porch of the boarding house where she was staying until she could find more permanent lodgings. She watched until he disappeared into the shimmering heat haze, then went inside to prepare for her first day of teaching, her heart feeling fuller than it had in a very long time. The days that followed were busy and challenging. Tabitha threw herself into her work, learning her students' names and abilities, planning lessons, organizing the chaotic schoolhouse into something resembling order. The children were a mix of ranch kids, townies, and the offspring of the growing number of settlers moving into the area. Some were eager to learn, others resistant, but Tabitha approached each one with patience and determination. She found lodgings in a small house behind the general store, owned by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who was happy to have the company and the income. Life in Agua Caliente was simpler than life in Tucson had been, but Tabitha found she did not mind. There was something appealing about the slower pace, the tight-knit community, the way everyone looked out for each other. But through it all, she found herself thinking about Owen, wondering where he was, what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that one heroic act and a few pleasant conversations did not constitute the foundation for anything real. But her heart refused to listen to logic. At night, lying in her narrow bed, she remembered the sound of his voice in the darkness, steady and reassuring. Remembered the gentle way he had tended her feet. Remembered the look in his eyes when he had asked if she wanted to see him again. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Tabitha began to wonder if he had changed his mind, if the distance and time had made him realize that whatever he had felt was just a passing thing. She tried not to be disappointed, tried to focus on her work and her new life, but a small, persistent ache had taken up residence in her chest. Then, on a Saturday afternoon in late October, as Tabitha was helping Mrs. Patterson in her small garden behind the house, she heard hoofbeats. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a tall figure on a bay horse riding down the main street. Her heart leaped into her throat. Owen. She dropped her gardening tools and stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, trying to calm the sudden wild beating of her heart. Owen dismounted in front of the general store and tied Red to the hitching post, then looked around as if searching for something. When his gaze landed on Tabitha, his whole face lit up. "Tabitha," he called, striding toward her. "Owen." She met him halfway, not caring that Mrs. Patterson was watching with undisguised interest. "You came back." "I said I would." He stood before her, dusty from the road, his hat in his hands. "I know it has been a while. Work kept me longer than I expected, but I have got 3 days off and I wanted to spend them here, if that is all right with you." "It is more than all right," Tabitha said, and the smile on her face felt like it might split her in two. Those 3 days were some of the happiest of Tabitha's life. Owen took a room at the boarding house again and spent his time helping around town during the day while Tabitha taught. In the evenings, they would walk together, exploring the area around Agua Caliente, talking and laughing and learning about each other. Owen showed her how to read the signs of the desert, how to find water by watching where birds flew, how to tell direction by the stars. Tabitha told him stories about her students, about the challenges and small triumphs of teaching. They discovered they both loved reading, though Owen's opportunities for it were limited. Tabitha promised to loan him books, and he promised to return them with his thoughts written in the margins. On the last evening before he had to leave, they rode out together on Red, Tabitha sitting in front of Owen with his arms around her to hold the reins. They found a spot near a small spring, one of the few reliable water sources in the area, and sat watching the sunset. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with things unsaid. "I hate leaving," Owen said finally. "Feels like I just got here." "I hate you leaving too," Tabitha admitted. "These past 3 days have been wonderful." Owen shifted, and Tabitha felt the warmth of him at her back, solid and reassuring. "Tabitha, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. This thing between us. You feel it too, or am I imagining it?" Tabitha's heart raced. She turned to look at him, and what she saw in his face gave her courage. "I feel it. I have felt it since that first day in the desert. It frightened me because I do not understand it. We barely know each other." "I know," Owen said, "but I cannot stop thinking about you. Have not been able to since the moment I saw you standing there in the desert, looking so brave and so scared at the same time. I tried to tell myself it was just concern, just wanting to make sure you were all right, but it is more than that. A lot more. What are we going to do?" Tabitha whispered, "You are 40 miles away. I will come as often as I can, every few weeks when I can get away, and when winter comes and ranch work slows down, I will have more time. We will figure it out if you want to try." "I do want to try, very much." Owen reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Then we will try. We will take it slow, figure things out as we go. I cannot make you any promises about the future, not yet. But I can promise I will be honest with you, and I will do my best not to hurt you." "That is all I can ask," Tabitha said. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. Tabitha's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own. The kiss lasted only a moment, but when they pulled apart, everything had changed. They were courting now, in whatever unconventional way that could work across 40 miles of Arizona desert. Owen rode to Agua Caliente whenever his work schedule allowed, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for only an afternoon and evening. He always brought small gifts, wildflowers, interesting rocks, once a book of poetry he had traded his favorite knife for. Tabitha treasured each one, and in return she wrote him letters that he carried folded in his shirt pocket, reading them by firelight when he was out on the range with the cattle. The town took notice, of course. In a place as small as Agua Caliente, nothing happened without everyone knowing about it. Mrs. Patterson became Tabitha's unofficial chaperone, always present when Owen visited, though she was kind enough to give them some privacy. The other townsfolk approved of the match. Owen's heroism in saving Tabitha had become local legend, embellished with each retelling, and his willingness to help anyone who needed it on his visits made him popular. Tabitha's students teased her mercilessly, drawing pictures of hearts in their slates and giggling when she blushed. As the months passed, their relationship deepened. The uncertainty and newness gave way to something solid and real. They talked about their hopes and fears, their pasts and their dreams for the future. Owen told her about his sister's death in more detail, about the guilt he had carried for not being there, about how meeting Tabitha had felt like a second chance at something he had thought lost forever. Tabitha told him about her mother's death 2 years earlier, about her father's overwhelming grief, about her own need to escape the sadness of that house and make something of her own life. They talked about practical things too. Owen's salary as a ranch hand was modest but steady. Tabitha made even less as a teacher, but her needs were simple. If they were to marry, and it was increasingly clear that they were heading in that direction, they would not have much in the way of material wealth. But neither of them seemed to care. What they had was each other, and that felt like more than enough. Winter came to the desert, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Owen was able to visit more frequently, and on one visit in December, nearly 8 months after their first meeting, he arrived with more than just his usual gifts. Tabitha knew something was different the moment she saw him. He was nervous, fidgeting with his hat, barely able to meet her eyes. "What is wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Owen said. "Better than fine. Can we go somewhere private? I need to talk to you." They walked out to their spot by the spring, bundled against the December chill. The sun was setting, throwing long shadows across the desert. When they reached the water's edge, Owen stopped and turned to face her. He took both her hands in his. "Tabitha, these past 8 months have been the best of my life. Every time I ride away from here, it gets harder. Every time I am out on the range, I find myself wishing you were there. I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy with a horse and some saved wages and no prospects for anything better. But I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tabitha's breath caught. Tears sprang to her eyes. Owen released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet set in it. "It is not much," he said, "but it was my grandmother's, and it is the only thing of value I own. Will you marry me, Tabitha? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who thinks you hung the moon?" "Yes," Tabitha said, the word bursting out of her. "Yes, of course, yes." Owen's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but Tabitha did not care. It was perfect. He was perfect. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deeper and more passionately than he ever had before, and Tabitha felt like she was flying. They were married 2 months later, in February of 1884, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Agua Caliente. Tabitha wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, who had kept her own wedding dress carefully preserved for 40 years. Owen wore his best shirt and pants, freshly cleaned and pressed. The whole town turned out for the wedding, cramming into the church until there was standing room only. Dr. Morris gave Tabitha away, and the town's minister performed the ceremony. When Owen kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The practical details of their life together had been worked out in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Owen had given his notice at the ranch, though he would work through the spring roundup. After that, he planned to find work closer to Agua Caliente, perhaps at one of the nearby ranches or even in town. Tabitha would continue teaching, at least for now. They would live in her small house behind the general store, and they would build a life together one day at a time. Their wedding night was spent in the boarding house, which had given them its best room decorated with wildflowers and candles. Tabitha was nervous, but Owen was patient and gentle, and what happened between them felt like a natural extension of everything they had already shared. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Tabitha felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his voice a rumble in his chest beneath her ear. "That I am happy. That if my horse had not died that day, I never would have met you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." "Strange how things work out," Owen said. "The worst day of your life led to the best thing in mine." "In ours," Tabitha corrected. "In ours," Owen agreed. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, as any marriage is, but they navigated it with humor and patience. Owen found work at a ranch only 10 miles from town, close enough that he could come home every few days, or Tabitha could ride out to visit him. Money was tight, and there were arguments about small things that turned out not to be small at all, and moments of frustration when the reality of married life did not quite match the romance of courtship. But through it all, they loved each other, and that made everything else bearable. Tabitha continued teaching, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. Owen worked hard, earning a reputation as one of the best hands in the territory, someone who could be counted on no matter what. In their spare time, they worked on their small house, adding a room here, fixing something there, making it truly theirs. They adopted a dog, a mutt named Jack, who attached himself to Owen with absolute devotion. Life was simple and hard and good. In the spring of 1885, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after he came home from the ranch, dusty and tired. He stared at her for a long moment, then picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and possibilities and the future. Owen immediately became overprotective, insisting Tabitha rest more, eat more, do less. She tolerated it with amusement and occasional exasperation, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in November of that year, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray-green eyes and a powerful set of lungs. They named him Samuel, after the doctor who had taken such good care of Tabitha that first night in Agua Caliente. Owen held his son for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, and Tabitha knew she had never loved him more than in that moment. Parenthood changed them both. Tabitha took a break from teaching to care for Samuel, though she planned to return once he was older. Owen worked harder than ever, taking extra jobs when he could to provide for his family. Money was still tight, but they managed. Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, curious and adventurous and completely fearless, keeping both his parents on their toes. When Samuel was 2, Tabitha returned to teaching part-time, and Mrs. Patterson was thrilled to watch the boy during the school day. Owen's hard work paid off when the ranch owner promoted him to assistant foreman, a position that came with better pay and a small house on the ranch property. They moved out of Agua Caliente with mixed feelings, sad to leave the town that had brought them together but excited for the opportunities ahead. Life on the ranch was different, harder in some ways, easier in others. Tabitha missed teaching, but she threw herself into being a ranch wife, learning to cook for large groups of cowboys, tending a vegetable garden, raising chickens. She discovered she had a talent for healing, and soon found herself functioning as an unofficial doctor for the ranch hands, treating injuries and illnesses with a mixture of common sense and remedies learned from her mother. She was good at it, and it gave her a sense of purpose beyond her roles as wife and mother. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who adored his father and followed him everywhere when Owen was home. Owen taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, putting him on a gentle old mare and leading her around the corral. Tabitha watched with her heart in her throat, but she trusted Owen completely. He would never let anything happen to their son. In 1888, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with dark hair and Tabitha's features. They named her Rose, after the horse whose death had brought Tabitha and Owen together. It seemed fitting, a way of honoring the pain that had led to such joy. Rose was a quieter child than Samuel, more serious and thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and watch the world go by. As she grew, she showed a love of learning that delighted Tabitha, and they spent hours reading together. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Drought years when the cattle died and money was scarce. Good years when the rains came and the grass grew tall and everything seemed possible. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranch life as much as his father did. Rose grew into an intelligent, determined young woman who wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Owen's hair started to gray at the temples, and lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. But to Tabitha, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him riding across the desert. They celebrated their 10th anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them after the children were in bed. Owen gave her a new ring to go with her wedding band, this one with a small diamond that must have cost him months of savings. Tabitha gave him a pocket watch engraved with the date they had met and the words, "You saved me." "You saved me too," Owen said, pulling her close. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me a reason for everything." "We saved each other," Tabitha said. By the time Samuel was 16 and Rose was 13, the ranch had expanded significantly, and Owen had been promoted to foreman. They lived in a larger house now, with multiple rooms and a real porch. They had a few head of cattle of their own, the start of what Owen hoped would one day be their own small ranch. Money was not plentiful, but it was enough. They were comfortable, secure, happy. Samuel started courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet young woman named Mary who made him laugh and blush in equal measure. Owen and Tabitha watched with amusement and a touch of melancholy, realizing their son was growing up, would soon have a life of his own. Rose announced she wanted to go away to normal school in Tucson to get her teaching certificate, and though the idea of her leaving terrified Tabitha, she and Owen agreed to support her dream. The years continued to pass. Samuel married Mary in a beautiful ceremony, and 2 years later made Owen and Tabitha grandparents when their first grandchild, a boy, was born. Rose completed her education and returned to Agua Caliente to teach at the same schoolhouse where Tabitha had started 20 years earlier. She met a young doctor who had just opened a practice in town, and they fell in love with a speed and certainty that reminded Tabitha of her own courtship. Owen and Tabitha watched their children build their own lives, their own families, their own stories. They retired from the ranch when Owen turned 55, his body finally protesting the years of hard physical labor. They bought a small place just outside Agua Caliente, close enough to be near their children and grandchildren, but far enough to have peace and quiet. They raised a few chickens, kept a vegetable garden, and spent their days reading and talking and enjoying the life they had built together. On a warm spring evening in 1909, 25 years after they had married, Owen and Tabitha sat on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and pink. Red had died years ago, but they had other horses now, grazing contentedly in the small pasture. Jack had been replaced by Jack II, and then Jack III, the current version sleeping at Owen's feet. "You ever think about that day?" Owen asked. "The day we met, all the time," Tabitha said. "I think about how lost I was, how terrified. And then you appeared like something out of a dream. I think about how brave you were, standing there alone in all that emptiness trying to figure out what to do. You could have fallen apart, but you did not. I would have died if you had not found me." "Maybe," Owen said. "Or maybe you would have found a way to survive. You are stronger than you think." Tabitha reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically, a gesture repeated so many thousands of times over the years that it required no thought. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best," Owen said. "Better than I ever imagined possible. You gave me that. We gave it to each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, familiar and safe. This was home. This was everything. "I love you," Owen said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you too," Tabitha replied. "Always have, always will." The years that followed brought their own share of joys and sorrows. More grandchildren were born, 7 in total, and then great-grandchildren began arriving. Owen developed arthritis in his hands, making simple tasks difficult, but he never complained. Tabitha's eyesight began to fail, but she refused to stop reading, holding books closer and squinting at the pages with determination. They grew old together, their bodies wearing out but their love remaining as strong as ever. Samuel took over the ranch where Owen had worked for so many years, having saved enough to buy it when the original owner retired. He ran it well, and it prospered under his management. Rose became the head teacher at the Agua Caliente school, beloved by generations of students. Both children visited their parents regularly, bringing grandchildren and then great-grandchildren to meet the couple whose love story had become family legend. On a cool December evening in 1919, a few weeks after Owen's 77th birthday, he and Tabitha sat by the fire in their small living room. Owen had been feeling poorly for a few days, though he insisted it was nothing. Tabitha knew better. She had seen the gray tinge to his skin, the way he struggled for breath after any exertion. She had urged him to see the doctor, but Owen had refused. "I am old," he had said with a shrug. "Old people feel poorly. It is what we do." Now, sitting by the fire, Owen reached over and took Tabitha's hand. "I need you to promise me something," he said. "Anything. When I am gone, do not grieve too long. Remember the good times, but do not let the sadness take over. Our life together was too full of joy to be remembered with tears." "Owen, promise me, Tabitha." She looked at him, this man who had been her whole world for 35 years, and felt tears burning in her eyes. "I promise, but you are not going anywhere, not yet." "Not yet," Owen agreed, but they both knew he was lying. He died in his sleep 2 nights later, peacefully with Tabitha beside him. She woke to find him gone, his hand still warm in hers, his face peaceful. For a long moment she could not move, could not breathe. Then the grief hit her like a physical blow, and she bent over him, sobbing. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona. Owen had touched so many lives over the years, had helped so many people, that they all came to pay their respects. Tabitha stood dry-eyed through the service, holding Rose's hand on one side and Samuel's on the other, finding strength in her children. Afterward, people shared stories about Owen, about his kindness and generosity, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity. Tabitha listened and felt a bittersweet pride. This was the man she had loved. This was his legacy. The months after Owen's death were the hardest of Tabitha's life. The house felt empty without him, the silence oppressive. She found herself talking to him anyway, telling him about her day, asking his opinion on things, half expecting him to answer. But slowly, day by day, she began to heal. She remembered her promise to him and tried to focus on the joy rather than the sorrow. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She lived for another 8 years after Owen's death, years filled with family and friends and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. On a spring morning in 1927, at the age of 80, Tabitha Crawford Ashford died peacefully in her sleep, in the same house where she had spent so many happy years with the man she loved. They buried her next to Owen in the small cemetery outside Agua Caliente. The headstones were simple, but the inscription on hers read, "She was stranded in the desert and he gave her his horse. They walked together for the rest of their lives." It was Samuel who had chosen the words, and when Rose read them, she wept and said they were perfect. The story of Owen and Tabitha became one of those tales that gets passed down through generations, growing and changing with each telling, but never losing its essential truth. It was a story about kindness and courage, about sacrifice and love, about two people who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a beautiful life together. It was a story that reminded people that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things, that heroism can be found in simple acts of decency, and that true love, when you find it, is worth every hardship and challenge life throws at you. Their great-great-grandchildren still live in Arizona, scattered across the state, and occasionally they gather for reunions where someone always tells the story of how their ancestors met. They talk about the cowboy who gave up his horse for a stranded woman, who walked beside her through the desert heat, who showed her that not all heroes wear badges or carry fame. They talk about the teacher who was brave enough to start a new life alone, who built a career and a family in a harsh land, who loved completely and without reservation. And they remember that sometimes, in the vast emptiness of the desert, you find exactly what you need. Sometimes, when you are lost and alone and convinced that all hope is gone, someone appears on the horizon. Someone who sees you, truly sees you, and decides that your life matters. Someone who gives you everything they have and asks for nothing in return. Someone who changes the entire course of your existence with one simple, generous act. Sometimes, that person becomes your whole world. And if you are very, very lucky, you get to spend the rest of your life walking beside them, just as they once walked beside you.